universally recognized symbols, but for most people around the world, if someone gives you the middle finger, you know it means fuck off. When you see a thumbs up, it's a pretty good sign. The coast is clear. And when you see a red flag, well, that's a sign that there's something that needs attention. But very often in life, there are red flags in front of us, but we just choose to ignore them. And that's exactly what I was doing when I made the decision to take in boarders to save my house after my divorce. It was the only home I'd known for 20 years. It was the last home my parents would ever have visited. It was the home that I raised my child in. And most importantly, if I was going to have to sell the house, I would have to clean out my closets. And that's how I ended up inviting in a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend I went to summer camp's son, Jean-Luc, 27, an aspiring actor from Paris by way of New York City, to come and rent a bedroom in my home. And we set off. And in the beginning was the word, and the word was bacon. The sound of bacon sizzling accompanied Jean-Luc's cranking up my espresso machine every morning. The scent wafted up the stairwell into my bedroom, invading my sleep. It seeped into everything like black mold or a lingering depression. And just when I'd successfully flushed the odor of the morning's rasher from the kitchen, he would start making supper. A grease stain, caramel in color, began forming on my kitchen ceiling. The shape oblong, like the Ile Saint-Louis. My refrigerator resembled a meat locker. He stocked it with bacon strips, bacon bits for seasoning, jars of bacon fat. It's possible he was using the bacon fat as a pomade, because every so often when he would pass by, I'd catch a whiff of pork. But even more exasperating than the fact that my closet now smelled like a smokehouse was that I'd lost my appetite. Since my kid left for college, food had lost its pleasure, and meals consisted of my standing over the sink, shoving something in my mouth, a hunk of rice cheese with all the flavor of a glue stick, placed on top of rice cake about as appetizing as a particle board seasoned with dust, and watching Jean-Luc take pleasure in carefully seasoning his meats and his vast array of colorful vegetables, well, it just made me sadder by comparison. And when not foraging for my pitiful fare, I took to skulking around the house trying to avoid Jean-Luc. But it was impossible, because soon it seemed like he wasn't just living in my home, it was more like an occupation. When not manning the stove, he'd settle in the backyard on the couch, watching hour after hour of television while he downed a glass of wine or 5 and then smoked weed. And soon bottles of whiskey joined the bottles of wine. And soon that medicinal odor was the first fragrance after bacon that I would encounter in the morning. And I was beginning to wonder if I should expire in my bedroom. I might not be discovered for months. Between the cigarettes, the weed, the bacon, and now the whiskey, no one would notice the smell of my corpse decaying. And then deadly wildfires broke out up and down the California coast. The state was burning. Our neighborhood received a high-risk fire warning. These are called red flag warnings. Now, when we get a red flag warning, residents are warned they're not supposed to cook outside or smoke. And I told Jean-Luc this, and he seemed to understand. But the next day, there he was, sitting on the couch, smoking weed. I didn't understand. Was it possible that he thought there was some sort of weed exclusion to a red flag alert? But I said nothing. Instead, I just placed an ashtray by the side of the couch and checked my homeowner's insurance to make sure it was up to date. Still, he proved useful around the house. My cat's raison d'etre was, at the time, inviting rodents over for play dates. He would tote them in his little teeth and bring them into the house and toy with them until he tired of their company, leaving them to roam about freely. Jean-Luc, living room, I would yell, and he would arrive, armed with a broom and a dustpan, and he never failed to dispense with them, although at times his cool ease reminded me that the French had stood in the streets and welcomed Hitler when they rode into Paris. 3 months into his tenancy, the stain on my kitchen ceiling was spreading. It was now resembling the wine region of Bourgogne, and the skunky smell of cannabis clung to my clothing. And I focused my energy on trying to find the upsides to his tenancy, and sometimes I could hear him on the phone speaking in French. And when he was speaking French, I could imagine that he was affirming what a marvelous choice Macron had made in choosing a partner 20 years his senior. What exactly was my breaking point? Well, it's never one thing. But towards the end of spring, the days were getting longer and my patience was getting shorter. And one day I woke up and there was an email letting me know that an assignment that I was counting on had been canceled, and there was another email from my ex-husband, and I rushed into the kitchen to make a double cap, a bracing double cap, when Jean-Luc bounded in to ask me about Austin Powers. Austin Powers, you want to talk to me right now about Austin Powers, the movie Austin Powers? He'd actually said Austin Pendleton, the actor, but I had misunderstood him. Yes, I studied with him, and I was wondering if your paths had ever crossed and what you thought of his work. Now, although I'm a big fan of Austin Pendleton, there were few things that I felt like doing more at that moment than talking about the highlights of Austin Pendleton's career. But the last straw might have been the bathrobe incident. One morning, Jean-Luc appeared for Bacon Fast in a teeny tiny terry cloth number that barely covered his derriere. And he was now always in that terry cloth bathrobe. It was a thigh too far. I worked up the courage to evict him only after finding him a new place to live. I secured a room in an apartment with a landlord named Liliana, who hailed from Normandy, and I offered everything short of packing. One of the lasting images I have of Jean-Luc was Jean-Luc carcassing a chicken to make bone broth, and he uttered the most French thing I've ever heard. When I asked him to pass a package of rice cakes that were on the counter, he said, "I don't know what that is." Oh, Jean-Luc, you thief. You stole my love of all things French, my love of Bacon, the actor Austin Pendleton, the movie Austin Powers by association, and people who are 27. But bien sûr, you taught me things. I learned that ennui is just another word for you're a bummer to be around. To cap things off, the week after we said au revoir, a minor earthquake rattled my house and my nerves, and my ex-husband didn't call to check on me, nor did my child, but you did. You called and texted, and boy, did I feel like an asshole. I'm sorry, Jean-Luc. Je regrette tout. How I must have seemed to you, shoving food into my mouth, standing at the sink like an animal. But mon ami, you should have seen the denouement coming. Moving in with a middle-aged woman in the process of getting divorced right after her only child went off to college. Oh, there were plenty of red flags, Jean-Luc. There were red flags.